My name is Nancy, and I'm 24 years old. My mom thinks I'm a failure because I spend all day staring at a screen, but she's about to find out that my little hobby just earned enough to buy the very house she's threatening to kick me out of. The scent of hospital bleach always hit the house 5 minutes before my mom actually walked through the door. It clung to her blue scrubs, a sharp, sterile reminder of the 12-hour shifts she pulled at the county hospital. I sat at the scratched oak kitchen table, the blue light from my laptop screen reflecting in my glasses, my fingers flying over the trackpad as I polished the vectors on a custom UI kit. The front door slammed. The walls of our small ranch-style house shuddered. "Nancy? Are you still in that same spot?" My mom's voice was raspy, worn thin like a piece of old sandpaper. I didn't look up. "Just finishing a draft, Mom. There's leftover lasagna in the fridge." She didn't go to the fridge. Instead, she marched into the kitchen, her sensible nursing clogs thudding heavily on the linoleum. She looked gray. There were deep shadows under her eyes that no amount of sleep could fix, and her hair was escaping her ponytail in frantic, frizzy strands. With a sudden, violent motion, she reached into her bag and whipped out a handful of envelopes. They hit the table like a gavel. 1, 2, 3. The white windows of the utility bills stared up at me like judging eyes. "I'm done," she whispered. Then her voice rose to a jagged edge. "I am exhausted, Nancy. I spend my days cleaning up after people, and I come home to see you doodling, playing games, while the bank sends me another past due notice." "It's not a game, Mom," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm building something. If I can just finish this kit—" "With what money?" she snapped, leaning over the table, the smell of cold coffee and exhaustion wafted off her. "The coffee shop pays you peanuts, and you spent half of that on a new stylus last week. I'm drowning here. This house is falling apart, and you're living in a fantasy land." She shoved the stack of bills toward my laptop, nearly knocking it over. "You think you're so smart because you know your way around a computer?" She laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Then prove it. If you're so smart, then pay your own bills. In fact, pay all of them. The electricity, the water, the mortgage, all of it, because I'm tapped out. If you can't help me by the 1st, then you can find a room at a friend's place. I can't carry you anymore." I looked at the bills. Then I looked at the mortgage statement. The amount due was printed in bold, uncompromising black ink. "The 1st?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "The 1st," she confirmed, her eyes hard. She turned and walked toward her bedroom, her shoulders slumped. "Start acting like an adult, or start packing." I sat in the silence that followed, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the kitchen. My hands were shaking, but as I reached out to touch the paper of the mortgage statement, a cold, sharp spark of determination lit up in my chest. She wanted me to pay the bills. Fine, I would pay them. All of them. The next morning, I didn't put on my green apron. I didn't head to the coffee shop to steam milk for people who didn't know my name. Instead, I called my manager and quit. My heart was thumping so hard I could feel it in my throat. It was a gamble, the kind of all-in move that usually precedes a disaster. But if I was going to pay those bills by the 1st, I couldn't spend 8 hours a day earning minimum wage. I needed every second to finish the Nexus UI kit. I retreated to my room like a hermit. I pulled the heavy curtains shut, leaving only a sliver of daylight to remind me when the sun was up. My world became the 13-inch glow of my laptop. I worked until the lines of code and the anchor points of my illustrations blurred into a messy soup. I lived on lukewarm coffee and granola bars I'd stashed in my nightstand. Every time I heard the front door open,
Every time Mom came home, I stayed silent. I didn't want the confrontation. I didn't want to see the disappointment in her eyes when she saw me still playing on the computer. By the third day, the tension in the house was thick enough to choke on. Mom knocked on my door around 6 p.m. She didn't wait for an answer before pushing it open. The room smelled like stale air and desperation. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed over her scrubs, her face a mask of weary disbelief. "I called the shop," she said. Her voice wasn't yelling anymore. It was worse. It was flat. "They said you quit, Nancy. On the very day I told you I needed help, you quit your only source of income?" I didn't turn around. My back was stiff, my neck screaming in protest. "I'm working, Mom. I'm just working on something different." Something different? She stepped into the room, glass crunching under her shoe, an empty soda bottle I'd dropped. She looked at the screen where I was meticulously shading a set of system icons. "You're drawing pictures, Nancy. The electricity bill doesn't care about your hobbies. The bank doesn't take art as a mortgage payment." "I know that," I whispered, my eyes burning from the screen glare. "Just give me until the 1st. You said the 1st. "I did," she said, backing away toward the door. She looked at me like she was looking at a stranger or a ghost she couldn't quite get rid of. "I've started looking for smaller apartments near the hospital. I suggest you start looking for a place too." She closed the latch. The click of the latch sounded like a countdown clock. I looked back at the screen. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't click the mouse. I took a deep breath, the metallic tang of an energy drink coating my tongue, and forced my fingers back to the keyboard. I had 12 days left. I had to make them count. The days that followed were a blur of caffeine and pixels. I stopped keeping track of the sun. I knew it was morning when the birds began their frantic chirping outside my window, and I knew it was evening when I heard the low rumble of Mom's car pulling into the driveway. I was living in a digital fortress. My room was a graveyard of empty protein bar wrappers and half-finished cups of cold tea. Every muscle in my back felt like it was being pulled tight by a winch, and my eyes were permanently bloodshot. But the Nexus UI kit was becoming something beautiful. It wasn't just a set of buttons and icons anymore. It was a seamless, intuitive ecosystem for developers. One night, around 3 a.m., I was staring at a feedback thread from a group of beta testers I'd found on a tech forum. "This icon set is too heavy," one user wrote. "The typography doesn't scale right on mobile," said another. I sighed, rubbing my temples. To an outsider, it looked like a wall of criticism. To me, it was a roadmap to perfection. I started typing, my fingers dancing across the keys, rewriting the CSS code to fix the scaling issues. The door creaked open. I didn't even turn around. I knew the rhythm of my mother's footsteps. She was in her bathrobe, her face pale in the doorway's shadows. She walked over and looked over my shoulder at the screen. She saw the lines of red text, the errors and rejections from the beta testers. She saw the word "failed" in a dialog box where a test script had crashed. "Oh, Nancy," she whispered. It wasn't a scold this time. It was a eulogy. "Honey, look at this. You're killing yourself for something that isn't even working. They're telling you it's no good." "It's just part of the process, Mom," I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. "I'm fixing the bugs." She reached out, her hand hovering over my shoulder before she pulled it back, as if afraid to touch me. "The 1st is only 5 days away. I've already signed the intent to vacate. We have to be out of here. Please, stop this. Go to your aunt's house. She said you can stay in her guest room if you help with the gardening." "I'm staying here," I said, my jaw tightening. I'm going to pay the bills. With what? She cried out, her voice cracking. With fixed bugs? Nancy, look at your screen. It's all red. It's all failures. Why can't you just be realistic for once in your life? She turned and fled the room, her muffled sobs echoing down the hallway. I sat there, staring at the screen. A single tear escaped and rolled down my cheek, stinging my tired skin. I didn't wipe it away. I just highlighted the red code, hit delete, and started typing a better version. I wasn't just fighting for the mortgage anymore. I was fighting for the right to be seen.
48 hours. That was all that stood between me and a packed suitcase. The air in my room felt heavy and charged, like the atmosphere right before a summer thunderstorm. My fingers were numb, my wrists throbbed with a dull ache, but the Nexus UI kit was finally done. It was no longer a collection of broken links and red error messages. It was a masterpiece of clean lines, intuitive flow, and elegant code. I sat back, my chair creaking in the silence of the 2 a.m. house. My cursor hovered over the large blue Publish button on the Global Dev Marketplace. Everything or nothing, I whispered. I clicked. The screen flickered as the upload bar crawled across the page. 50%, 80%, 100%. Product live. Then, silence. For the first hour, nothing happened. I refreshed the page until my finger cramped. 0 sales, 5 views. My heart sank, heavy as a stone. Maybe Mom was right. Maybe I had spent the last month chasing a ghost while our lives crumbled around us. I rested my forehead on the edge of the desk, the plastic cool against my skin, and I must have drifted off into a shallow, feverish sleep. Chime. My eyes snapped open. I thought I had dreamed it. Chime. Chime, chime. I sat up, squinting at my phone. A notification from the Marketplace app. New sale. Nexus UI kit, $49. New sale. Nexus UI kit, $49. I blinked, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. Suddenly, the phone didn't just chime, it began to vibrate continuously. The Marketplace forum had caught wind of it. Someone with a massive following, a lead designer at a major tech firm, had tweeted, "Finally, a UI kit built by someone who actually understands workflow. This is the new gold standard." The notifications started rolling in so fast, the sounds blurred together. It sounded like a digital slot machine hitting the jackpot. Chime, 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 chime. I watched the total revenue counter on my dashboard. $500, $1,200, $4,500. I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in my chest. I wanted to scream, to run into Mom's room and jump on her bed, to tell her we were saved. But I looked at the calendar on my wall. It was the 30th. I still had 1 day left, and if I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. I didn't go to her. I stayed in my chair, watching the numbers climb, my heart racing faster than the sales. I wasn't just paying the light bill, I was building a fortress. The next morning, I didn't wake up to an alarm. I woke up to the sound of skirt thud. It was the sound of heavy-duty packing tape being dragged across cardboard. I sat up, my neck cracking painfully, and looked at my laptop. It was still open, the screen dimmed. I tapped the spacebar. Total revenue, $82,400. I stared at the number until it didn't look like money anymore. It looked like a phone number or a secret code. My heart did a slow, heavy roll in my chest. I felt like I was floating and drowning at the same time. I walked out of my room, my legs feeling like lead. In the living room, the transformation had already begun.
The pictures of my graduation had been taken off the walls, leaving pale rectangles on the dusty paint. 3 large brown boxes sat in the center of the rug. Mom was kneeling by the bookshelf, wrapping her favorite ceramic lighthouse in newspaper. She looked smaller than she had yesterday. "I found a studio apartment near the hospital," she said, not looking at me. Her voice was thick, as if she were speaking through a layer of wool. "They'll let me move in tomorrow morning. I told them we'd have the house broom clean by noon." "Mom!" "I don't want to hear it, Nancy." She finally looked up, and the sight of her red-rimmed eyes stopped the breath in my lungs. "I really don't. You had your chance. I asked for help, and you stayed in that room. I hope whatever you were making was worth losing our home." I opened my mouth to tell her. I wanted to scream, "Look at my phone, look at the dashboard." But then I looked at the boxes. I looked at the exhaustion etched into the very marrow of her bones. A simple, "I have money now," felt too small for the years of stress she'd carried. She'd spent a decade worrying about the next bill. She didn't need a maybe or a digital screen. She needed something real, something undeniable. "I'm going to the bank," I said instead. She let out a short, bitter laugh and went back to wrapping the lighthouse. "For what? To withdraw the $20 in your savings? Go ahead. You'll need it for gas." I didn't argue. I grabbed my keys and my laptop and drove to the bank in town. The air outside was crisp, smelling of autumn and wood smoke, a sharp contrast to the stagnant air of my bedroom. Inside the bank, I sat across from a woman in a sharp blazer who looked at my messy bun and wrinkled t-shirt with polite skepticism. That skepticism lasted exactly 5 seconds until I turned my laptop around and showed her the verified transfer from the marketplace. "I need a cashier's check," I told her, my voice finally steady, "for the full payoff amount of this mortgage, and I need it in a legal envelope." The woman's eyebrows shot up toward her hairline. She started typing, her manicured nails clicking against the keys like a frantic telegraph. "One moment, Miss Miller. I'll need to call the mortgage department to get the exact daily payoff quote." I waited, my pulse drumming in my ears. When she finally slid that thick, cream-colored envelope across the desk, it felt heavier than it looked. It felt like 10 years of my mother's gray hairs and missed vacations. I walked out to my car, clutching the envelope to my chest. Tomorrow was the first. Tomorrow, the boxes wouldn't be going to a studio apartment.
The drive back felt like a victory lap in slow motion. Every stoplight I hit gave me another moment to stare at the passenger seat, where the envelope sat, tucked safely inside my bag. It looked so ordinary, just a piece of paper, but it was a mountain of gold. When I walked through the front door, the house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a stage set being dismantled. The rug was gone, rolled up and leaning against the wall. The echoes were louder now, bouncing off the bare floors. Mom was in the kitchen, sitting on a folding chair because the kitchen set had already been sold to a neighbor. She was eating a bowl of cereal in the dim light of the overhead fan. She didn't look up when I came in. "I left some milk for you," she said softly. "Don't let it spoil. The fridge has to be empty by 10 tomorrow." I sat down on the floor across from her, my back against the cabinets. "I'm not hungry, Mom." "You should be. You've barely eaten in weeks." She finally looked at me, her eyes tracking the dark circles under mine. She sighed, a long, shaky sound. "Nancy, I'm sorry I screamed at you. I am just so tired, but we have to move on. Maybe a fresh start in the city will be good for both of us. You can find a real job there, something with a paycheck every Friday." I felt the envelope in my bag, burning like a hot coal. I wanted to reach out and give it to her right then. I wanted to see the weight lift off her shoulders instantly. But I knew if I did it now, in the middle of this sad, half-eaten cereal dinner, it wouldn't land the same way. I needed her to see that I wasn't just paying a bill,
I was changing our lives. I understand, Mom, I said, keeping my voice level. But remember what you said. Give me until the 1st. Tomorrow is the 1st. She put her spoon down, the plastic clicking against the porcelain. Nancy, please, no more games. The truck is coming at 9. The landlord is coming at 10 to collect the keys. Just wait, please. Just wait until tomorrow morning. She didn't answer. She just picked up her bowl, rinsed it in the sink, and walked to her room without a word. The sound of her door closing was the final note of the day. I went to my room, my empty, hollow room. I didn't open my laptop. I didn't need to check the sales anymore. I knew they were still climbing. I just lay down on my mattress, which was now just a thin rectangle on the floor, and tucked the envelope under my pillow. I didn't sleep much. I listened to the house. I listened to the pipes creaking and the wind whistling through the screen door. I thought about all the times I'd heard her crying in the bathroom over the checkbook. I thought about the final notice letters I'd seen her hide under the mail pile. The 1st was finally here, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of it. The morning of the 1st arrived with a cruel, bright sun that illuminated every speck of dust in the empty living room. I woke up on my floor-bound mattress to the sound of a heavy diesel engine idling in the driveway. It wasn't the moving truck. It was Mr. Henderson, the landlord's representative, coming to do the final walkthrough and collect the keys. I stood in the hallway, clutching the legal envelope so hard the paper crinkled. Mom was in the kitchen, her back to me. She was wearing her oldest pair of jeans and a faded sweatshirt, staring at the empty space where our dining table used to be. A single box of essentials sat at her feet. She looked like she had aged 10 years in a single month. "He's here," she said, her voice a hollow shell. She didn't turn around. "Nancy, grab your bag. We're leaving." A sharp knock at the door made us both jump. Mr. Henderson entered without waiting, a clipboard in his hand and a look of professional indifference on his face. "Morning, Brenda. Shame about the place. It's a nice lot. I've got the keys return forms right here. Once you sign and hand them over, we're all square." Mom reached into her pocket, her fingers trembling as she pulled out the brass keyring. The sound of the keys jangling was the most depressing noise I'd ever heard. It sounded like a white flag. "Wait," I said. My voice was louder than I intended. It echoed off the bare walls, making both of them turn toward me. Mom looked at me with a mixture of pity and exhaustion. "Nancy, please," she whispered. "Don't make this harder. Give me your keys." I walked toward them, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I didn't look at the landlord. I looked straight at my mother, at the woman who had worked double shifts in a bleach-scented hospital just to keep me fed. "You told me if I was so smart, I should pay my own bills," I said. "Nancy, stop it," Mom snapped, a flash of her old fire returning. "This isn't the time for a point-by-point recap of our fights. We are losing the house." "We aren't losing anything," I said. I stepped forward and slid the thick, cream-colored envelope right onto the kitchen counter, right between her and the landlord. "What is this?" she asked, her eyes darting from the envelope to my face. "More drawings? Nancy, I don't have time for—" "Open it," I commanded. She looked at Mr. Henderson, who gave a bored shrug. Then she looked back at me. With a sigh of pure exasperation, she tore the top of the envelope. She reached inside and pulled out the single heavy sheet of paper. She didn't speak. She didn't even breathe. I watched her eyes travel across the document. I watched them hit the bank's official gold seal. I watched them stop at the pay to the order of line and then finally the amount line. $142,000. The keys slipped from her hand, clattering onto the linoleum. Her face went from pale to ghostly white. "Nancy?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the refrigerator. What is this? Where did you get the cashier's check for the mortgage balance?" "I paid the bills, Mom," I said, a lump forming in my throat. "I paid all of them." Mr. Henderson leaned over, his professional mask slipping. He squinted at the check, then at the letter from the bank's mortgage department. "Is that a full payoff?" "It is," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "So you can take your clipboard and your vacate notices and leave. This house doesn't belong to the bank anymore. It belongs to her." The silence that followed was heavy, but for the first time in my life, it didn't feel tense. It felt like the air after a fever finally breaks. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, his eyes lingering on the check for a second too long before he tucked his clipboard under his arm. "Well," he muttered, sounding almost disappointed that he didn't have an eviction to process, "I'll have to take this to the main office to finalize the title release. You'll get the deed in the mail within the month. Congratulations, Brenda." He turned and walked out the front door. The sound of his diesel truck fading down the street was the sweetest music I'd ever heard. Mom was still staring at the check. She hadn't moved a muscle. A single fat tear tracked through the dust on her cheek, leaving a clean trail behind it. "I don't understand," she whispered. She looked at the empty living room, then at me. $142,000, Nancy? People don't just get that much money, not for drawing on a screen. I walked over and took her hands. Her skin was rough and calloused from years of sanitizing and scrubbing. "It's not just drawing, Mom. I built a tool that thousands of people needed to do their own jobs. I sold 5,000 copies of it in 48 hours, and it's still selling while we're standing here." She finally looked at me, really looked at me. The skepticism that had lived in her eyes for years was gone, replaced by a profound, shaking sense of awe. "You stayed up all night, every night, for this?" "I stayed up for us. I knew you couldn't do it anymore. I knew if I didn't finish it, we'd lose everything." Mom suddenly pulled me into a hug. She smelled like the newspaper she'd been using to pack, but underneath that, she just smelled like Mom. She cried then, not the quiet, hopeless sobs I'd heard through the bathroom door, but great, gasping lungfuls of relief. She held on to me like I was the only thing keeping her grounded in a world that had just flipped upside down. "I am so sorry," she choked out into my shoulder. "I called you lazy. I called you a dreamer. I didn't see it, Nancy. I was so blinded by the bills that I didn't see what my own daughter was capable of." "It's okay, Mom," I said, my own tears finally falling. "You taught me how to work hard. I just did it in a different way." That afternoon, we didn't move out. Instead, we spent the next 4 hours doing something even better. We unpacked. We put the pictures back on the walls. We unrolled the rug. We set the ceramic lighthouse back on the shelf. The house felt different now. The creaks in the floorboards didn't sound like a building falling apart. They sounded like a home settling back into its skin. As the sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows across the kitchen floor, Mom sat down at the counter. She pushed aside the empty cereal bowl and looked at my laptop, which was sitting there, glowing softly. "So," she said, her voice finally steady, a small, genuine smile playing on her lips. "This Nexus thing? Show me how it works. Show me what you were doing at 3 in the morning while I was yelling at you." I sat down beside her and opened the lid. I showed her the lines of code, the vector points, and the dashboard that was still ticking upward, now at $91,000 and climbing. I explained how a single idea, built with enough discipline, could reach across the world. She didn't understand all the tech speak, but as she watched the numbers grow, she reached out and squeezed my hand. "You're so smart, Nancy," she said, her voice thick with pride. I smiled, leaning my head on her shoulder. "I know, Mom. That's why I paid the bills."